I am Gloria, a 32-year-old economist, and at first glance, my life seems perfect. My husband, Michael, and I live in a neat, beautifully furnished house that we bought together, pouring our hearts into it. The house is filled not only with luxurious furniture but also with paintings, art pieces, and expensive gadgets. Every detail reflects our taste and our pursuit of perfection. Michael and I have always dreamed of having a big family, but unfortunately, things weren't as simple as we had imagined. I tried not to lose hope, believing that at some point everything would fall into place. But something wasn't right. A nagging, painful spot in the corner of my soul reminded me of itself every day, like a quiet battle I fought within myself, hiding it from others, including Michael. He was my support, but I couldn't even tell him how hard it was for me. I kept believing in a miracle, despite everything. One Friday evening, as I was tidying up our bookshelf, Michael walked into the room, and his gaze was unusually troubled. He didn't meet my eyes, which immediately made me uneasy. "Gloria, I need to tell you something," he said quickly, in a controlled tone. His voice sounded heavy, as if he was about to reveal something important and not entirely pleasant. "What's wrong?" I felt my heart tighten with anxiety, despite trying to remain calm. "It's about Laura, my sister. She's having problems with her husband again. She wants to spend the weekend here with the kids." His words hit me like a shot, and I froze, feeling everything inside me tighten. Laura and her children had always been a test for our peace. 3 kids, little hurricanes, with their endless mischief and boisterous games always turned our home into a real zoo. I knew this visit wouldn't bring anything good. "Michael, you know how I feel about this," I replied calmly, though deep down it troubled me. "Our house turns into chaos when they're here. The kids are always running around, fighting, breaking things." "Yes, but they're just kids, Gloria," he countered, a bit irritated. "Laura needs our support. You know she can't handle this on her own. But she never tries to discipline them, and it's exhausting," I said, unable to hide my disappointment. These weekends, where I tried to find harmony, had become almost impossible for me. Michael was persistent. "Please, Gloria, I'm begging you. You know she's my sister." I sighed, struggling to contain my frustration. "Fine, but I don't like it," I said, trying to hold back my inner frustration. Weighing the pros and cons, I realized I couldn't refuse him. The next day, Laura arrived with the kids, and all my premonitions came true. As soon as they entered the house, the space immediately filled with the sounds of children's laughter, screams, and the patter of little feet. Soon, everything felt like a storm, toys scattered across the floor, dishes that the children seemed to break almost immediately, and laughter so loud that I could barely focus on anything else. I tried to remain calm, but at some point, I began to lose ground. I found the youngest, Tommy, drawing directly on the living room wall. His little hands, splashing bright colors onto the white walls, became the last straw. "Tommy, stop!" I shouted, unable to hold back. My voice was much sharper than I had intended, but it was already unbearable. Laura, who was lying on the couch watching TV without even bothering to get up, sharply responded. "Don't yell at my son, Gloria. He's just a child. Maybe if you had your own, you'd understand." I felt her words hit me deeply. My heart squeezed, and I felt a mix of anger and sadness. It wasn't fair. "Laura, I'm just trying to keep some order in the house," I replied, my voice trembling, feeling overwhelmed with emotion. Michael entered the room as the noise and chaos reached his ears. His gaze darted between me and Laura, trying to figure out what was happening. "Gloria, you're being too harsh with the kids," Laura complained, accusing me of relentlessly criticizing them. They're ruining our home, she added, a slight tone of indignation in her voice. Michael exclaimed, clearly unsure of how to resolve the situation, his eyes anxiously flicking between us. Let's all just calm down, he said, trying to act as the peacemaker, but his words felt empty in the context of everything going on. They're just kids, Gloria, they don't mean any harm. I felt a wave of disappointment rise in my chest. Once again, he sided with Laura. It was always the same. In the end, I was left feeling alone, misunderstood, as if my feelings didn't matter, while his sister was always put on a pedestal. I walked to another room, feeling the coldness of solitude settle in our home, a place that once felt like my sanctuary. It was a Saturday morning, a few weeks later. I sat in the kitchen, enjoying a rare moment of silence when Michael entered. His expression was uncertain, which immediately set me on edge. Gloria, I need to tell you something, he began, his voice tinged with unease. My heart tightened, and I felt a quiet sense of dread creeping up. I expected something bad. Michael continued, quickly and uncertainly, as though afraid I wouldn't handle it. Laura called. She's coming over again today with the kids. I almost choked on my coffee, struggling to process his words. This can't be. We had just gotten through her last visit, and now again? My reaction was immediate. Michael, you can't be serious, I muttered, unable to hide my confusion and rising irritation. We just had them here, why again? I know, but she's really struggling right now, he said, his voice almost apologetic. We need to be there for her. I slammed the cup onto the table, feeling my anger boil inside. Michael, these weekends are always taken over by her and those wild kids. And there's no place for us. I blurted out, barely holding back my emotions. Gloria, please, just try to understand. It's family, he said, trying to calm me down. I sighed heavily, disappointed. This constant flow of visits, without end or measure, left us no time for ourselves. Fine, I said bitterly, but this time I'm not playing nanny. A little while later, Laura arrived with her kids, and as always, it all began again. The house filled with the sound of tiny feet, loud laughter, and shouting. I clenched my fists, trying to maintain control, but every movement of the children caused tension to rise inside me. I walked into the living room, where the kids were building something with their toys. My nerves were frayed, but I tried to summon the strength to speak to them calmly. Guys, could you play a little quieter? I asked, trying to sound gentle, but my request came out more like a reproach. Laura, sitting on the couch, absorbed in her phone, barely looked up. Oh, let them be, Gloria, kids will be kids, she said, uninterested in either my words or my feelings. I gritted my teeth, unable to hold back my irritation. This was becoming unbearable. It's not about that, Laura, I replied, feeling my words spill out despite my best efforts. They need to learn respect. Laura rolled her eyes, clearly trying to hide her irritation. You don't understand, she said dismissively. You don't have kids. Her words struck me like a blow to the heart. It was a low blow. I was about to respond, unable to hold it in any longer, but in that moment, Michael intervened. Let's not start this again, please, he said, holding me back. Gloria, they're just playing. Laura, try to keep them in check a little. I didn't answer, I just sighed heavily, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness fill me. The chaos continued throughout the day. The kids kept running wild, and Laura, as always, remained indifferent. I felt like a stranger in my own home, as if I were locked in a cage that I had built myself. Every word, every look from Laura and Michael seemed to push me further away from the place that should have been my sanctuary. With each passing hour, I felt my patience draining away. At dinner, the situation escalated. The youngest, Tommy, at some point simply threw his food on the floor, and I, unable to hold back any longer, snapped. Enough. This is not a circus. Laura stood up, her face flushed with anger, and I felt the tension between us intensify. "How dare you speak to my child like that?" she blurted out, her voice full of indignation. "You're so tense, Gloria, just relax a little." Michael tried to play the peacemaker, his words full of softness and persuasion. "Gloria, maybe you're just nitpicking. They're just kids." I looked at him, and in that moment, my chest felt hollow. A wave of betrayal overwhelmed me. I had tried so hard to maintain some semblance of harmony, and yet, he was on her side. Am I too harsh? "Look at this mess," I said, my voice growing hoarse with disappointment. "We can't keep living like this. Every weekend is a battle." Laura laughed, her laughter dry, almost mocking. "If it's such a burden, maybe we shouldn't come anymore?" I felt the words catch in my throat, and without thinking, I replied, "Maybe that's for the best." The room fell into silence. Michael didn't say a word, his gaze filled with shock and disappointment, as if I had betrayed him. Laura quickly grabbed her children, and they, like a flock of wild birds, flew out of the room, leaving only a heavy atmosphere behind. I stood there, holding my breath, realizing that my attempt to maintain order in this house had only led to more chaos. All I could do was tighten my grip again, try to keep everything under control, even though the internal tension wouldn't let go. The next morning, on this quiet Saturday morning, I stood in the living room, staring at a painting that had been in my family for generations. It was not just an object, but a part of my history, a legacy passed down from my grandfather. I allowed myself to get lost for a moment, sinking into thoughts of the past, when the doorbell rang. I sighed, knowing exactly who it could be. I went to answer, and, as expected, there was Laura with her kids, buzzing around her like bees around a hive. "We thought we'd surprise you," Laura said with a grin, her eyes sparkling with mischief, almost like a sly cat who had caught a mouse. Surprise. I forced a smile, but deep down, it was the worst surprise I could have imagined. "Such a surprise, indeed," I replied with a hint of sarcasm in my voice. At that moment, Michael appeared. His face broke into a wide smile, and he greeted them joyfully. "Hey, it's great to see you all," he said, walking toward us. I pulled Michael aside, my patience running thin. We needed to talk, and I wasn't going to delay it any longer. "Michael, this is not okay," I said quietly but firmly. "She always shows up unannounced. This isn't normal." As always, Michael seemed tired from the conversation, but his voice remained soft and soothing. "This is for today, Gloria. She just needs support." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of this conversation draining away. I let it go, gritting my teeth, but all my exhaustion was felt in every step I took. The day went on in a blur of noise and chaos. The children were everywhere, running around the house, jumping, shouting, leaving destruction in their wake. Laura was almost indifferent, not even trying to keep an eye on them. I tried to find some peace while cleaning, when suddenly a loud crash came from the living room. My heart dropped to my stomach. I rushed over, and before me was a terrible sight. My beloved painting, the one I had so carefully preserved, lay on the floor. The frame was broken, and the canvas itself was torn. I couldn't believe my eyes. "What happened?" I gasped, trembling with anger, and there was something unbearably painful in my voice. The room fell silent. The children stood there, guilty, their eyes avoiding mine, but Laura, she just shrugged. "Oh, they were just playing, Gloria," she said with complete indifference, as if nothing had happened. "It's just a painting." Her words pierced my chest like a knife. I couldn't believe she was so casual about something that meant so much to me. "Laura, do you even understand how much this means?" I asked, feeling my voice tremble with both anger and despair. Michael quickly tried to assess the situation, attempting to justify the children's actions in a vague way. "Gloria, it was an accident," he said, as if trying to ease the tension. "They're just kids." I felt my hands ball into fists, and in an instant, disappointment flashed before my eyes. It was hard to believe that he could take something so lightly that, for me, wasn't just an object, but a part of my past, a part of my life. "An accident?" I whispered, but immediately exclaimed, feeling a surge of anger and sadness overwhelm me. "It was a family heirloom, Michael." Laura rolled her eyes, clearly trying to throw me off balance. "Oh, please, Gloria, it's not the end of the world. You're overreacting." Her words hit me like a blow. I didn't want her disdain to push me into hysterics, but the pain was just too sharp. "Overreacting?" I almost shouted, feeling every word weigh on me like a stone, draining my strength. "It's about respect, something you and your kids clearly lack. I'm trying to hold on to something important, and you—" My voice faltered, anger flooding through me, and I felt all my strength slipping away. I could no longer stay calm, I could no longer stay silent. Michael, trying to smooth things over, attempted to intervene. "Let's all just take a breath," he said, his voice soft, but with a hint of irritation now. "This isn't something worth fighting over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he say such things when everything around us was falling apart? We were talking about our home, my family, about what was valuable to me, and he was trying to minimize it. Not worth fighting over what? I couldn't hold back my emotions. "Michael, when are you finally going to stand up for what's important to us? To our home?" The children started crying, making everything even more painful. Laura looked at me with contempt, as if I were to blame for everything going wrong. "Look what you've done," she exclaimed, her voice filled with reproach. "You're throwing a tantrum over some old painting." That was the last straw. I couldn't listen anymore. I couldn't stand there and tolerate what was happening in this house any longer. "Leave," I said quietly but firmly. "Leave now." My voice was steady, not up for discussion, stronger than it had ever been. Laura and Michael went silent, their eyes meeting for a moment, but no words followed. Laura tried to say something, but couldn't find the words. Michael was in shock, his face changing, and his eyes reflected disbelief. "You can't kick my family out, Gloria," he said, his voice filled with outrage. "It's my house too," he retorted, his tone cold and distant. "We can't just throw people out." "I've had enough," I said, not wanting to hear any more. "They need to leave. Please, just let them go." Michael frowned, and I felt his discontent turn into fury. He was lost in his own thoughts, probably unable to understand why I was doing this. But for me, the decision had been made. I couldn't stand it any longer. Laura mumbled something under her breath, accusing me of cruelty. She took her children, and as soon as they were gone, the silence in the house was deafening. It was something new, this emptiness that, despite its heaviness, felt like relief. And yet, I felt how each step became heavier, how I was losing something that once seemed possible. Michael looked at me, his eyes cold, distant. "Gloria, this time you've gone too far," he said softly, his voice not harsh, but there was pain in it. "I'm protecting our home," I replied, feeling my voice tremble. I couldn't help but respond. "I want you to support me, not her. We're talking about our home." That Saturday, as I sat with a cup of coffee, trying to gather the pieces of everything that had been shattered, the painting and the relationship, Michael approached me. His expression was serious, weary, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. It was trouble. "We need to talk," he said, not wasting any time, going straight to the point. "What happened this time?" I asked, trying to hold back my own irritation, though the sharpness in my voice was inevitable. "It's Laura," he said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "She's getting a divorce. She's a mess, and she needs to stay with us, with the kids, for a few months." My face froze. I stared at him, unable to believe my ears. I stood there, unmoving, until a rush of anger flared up in my chest. "Hold on, you've lost your mind," I said, going from surprise to fury. "Michael, she's your sister, but that's no reason to put her above everything else." I slammed my coffee cup onto the table, the sound sharp, as if emphasizing the tension that had thickened in the air. "And what about what I need?" My words were almost a whisper, but there was a hidden rage in them. "What about our life? Can't we just turn away from Laura for a while?" Michael persisted, his eyes filled with some inner struggle, but I could feel it pressing on me with every word. I felt a wave of disappointment rise again. This was always about what Laura needed. And what about me? What about us, our life, our plans? Michael sighed, rubbing his temples, his face twisted with exhaustion and confusion. "Gloria, I'm asking you to understand. This is important." His voice was soft but carried an underlying insistence. The word "important" was repeated like a mantra, but it brought me no relief. I felt bitterness rising within me. Understand? I couldn't hold back my anger. "Understand you, Michael. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of always compromising." "No, I'm done understanding and compromising." I shot back, and there was not a trace of softness in my words. Michael looked at me, his eyes darkened with tension. "They're coming, Gloria," he said with absolute certainty. It was like a sentence. "It's not up for discussion." The silence that followed his words was thick and oppressive. All I could feel was poison in my blood. I stared at him, unable to believe we had come to this point. Our conversation had ended, but the tension hung in the air, like an unpleasant smell that couldn't be gotten rid of. The next day, when I returned home from my morning walk, I realized my car was gone. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the empty spot in the parking lot. I called Michael, and my voice sounded controlled but tense. "Where's my car?" I demanded. "I don't see it." "I took it," Michael said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Laura needs it more. She has kids." Those words immediately sparked a wave of fury. "You took my car without even asking?" I felt the blood boil in my veins. "I paid for it with my money. I made the decision." He replied briefly, as always, not going into details. "It was the last thing, Gloria." I felt a tightness in my chest from bitterness. He was doing everything his way, completely ignoring my desires and needs. I could no longer remain silent, no longer stand aside, watching him control everything. "You do everything your way?" "Fine, Michael, I'll do it my way," I said, ending the conversation. There was something decisive in my voice, something that made me feel like I was on the right path. I hung up the phone and lowered my head, trying to gather myself. Everything became clear. I couldn't keep going down this path. Michael and I had been at war, a war he didn't even notice. and I was finally ready to take action. That night, as I stood in the living room, surveying each room of our house, I saw how everything we had built together was being destroyed under his influence. This house was my project. I filled it, I arranged it, and now I felt something important crumbling, the foundation beneath me disappearing. I needed to do something bold, something decisive. Something that would raise the stakes. And Michael had pushed me to take that step, and now it was time to respond. On Monday, before the sun had even risen, I started my plan. I had always been meticulous, always keeping track of details, collecting receipts, recording every purchase, because there was something about it that gave me a sense of control. And now, I understood that I needed that control more than ever. I called the most reliable moving company in the city. I had a plan, and I knew it would be executed precisely and carefully. The movers arrived early, and I was ready. "Everything I bought is leaving today," I said firmly, handing them the list. Furniture, appliances, all the items I paid for with my own money, everything I considered mine. The moving team looked at me, then at the list, and nodded. "We'll handle it, ma'am, in parts." They were confident, and their calmness only strengthened my resolve. I knew this step would be a shock to Michael, but I could no longer stay in place. The house that had once been full of life now looked like an empty shell, stripped of all the little things that had once created its atmosphere. The living room, where we used to laugh and argue, was now lifeless, as if the very energy had left these walls. The bedroom, once our sanctuary, was now just an empty space, a reminder of what had been but no longer existed. Michael was still absent, unaware of the transformation his home had undergone. The emptiness that filled the house felt tangible in every room, and slowly, it became a metaphor for our marriage. An emptiness, devoid of warmth, love, and understanding, was all that remained. I stood among the ruins, among what had once been my home, and understood that no object could bring back what we had lost. After the last item was loaded, I made one final walk through the house, and there was no sense of relief in it. This was the final farewell. Our home, a symbol of our shared life, was now empty, stripped of everything that had connected us. There was no trace left of me or my contributions. It had become nothing more than a shell, echoing with our memories, but no longer holding anything real. I left before Michael came back, not wanting to witness his accusations, pleas, or perhaps reproaches. I wanted to free myself from this final stage, from this predictable chaos. I knew Michael would feel shock, maybe even regret, but I wanted him to experience it without me. I got into the car, and my journey led me to my mother's house, a place where I could at least find safety from the turmoil of this chaotic reality. I couldn't stop replaying in my mind the moment when Michael would walk into the empty house. I imagined how his confusion would slowly turn into realization and shock. Perhaps there would be a hint of regret, but that I could no longer witness. I sat in my old bedroom, surrounded by the things I had managed to take with me. It was a kind of act of defense, a step toward liberation, toward reclaiming what had been lost. And no matter how hard it was, I felt that this was the only right decision. When the phone rang, I didn't immediately recognize the number. But as soon as I picked it up, I heard Michael's voice. His fury was palpable, even through the phone. "Gloria, what the hell have you done?" he roared. It felt like a blow. His voice was a mix of fury and disbelief, something I hadn't heard in a long time, and it was unbearable. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and replied in a steady voice. "I took what belongs to me, just like you took my car. The house is empty, you stripped it bare, how could you?" His voice was sharp, accusing. Even through the phone, I could feel how he was brimming with anger. "You made your priorities clear, Michael," I couldn't hold back the bitterness in my words. And I've made mine. There was silence on the other end of the line. A few seconds passed, and I knew that those seconds meant a lot to both of us. Eventually, Michael broke the silence. "I'm coming over, we'll settle this now," he said, and without waiting for my response, he hung up. An hour later, Michael was at the door. He stood there, his face twisted with fury, his eyes full of rage. He scanned the room, as if trying to understand how everything could have changed so quickly. "You've lost your mind, Gloria," his voice was loud and accusatory. "You took everything, leaving me with nothing." I didn't look away, and although there was not only anger but also pain in my soul, I spoke calmly, decisively. "I left you what you chose," I replied, not allowing him to take control again. "Your sister, her kids, and the house you preferred over our marriage." His gaze became more and more stunned, and his anger seemed to have no limits. Meeting his gaze, I felt my resolve strengthen. He stood before me, his eyes burning with fury, unable to control his rage. His words shot out like bullets, each one hitting its target. "You think this is some kind of game? You think you can just take everything and leave?" His voice rose, and I saw how he was holding back his emotions. It felt like a clash of two worlds, where I was ready to leave my mark, but he wasn't. I didn't back down. I didn't allow myself to doubt what I was doing. My voice was firm, despite the storm raging inside me. "This isn't a game, Michael. This is my life, and yes, I can leave," I said, feeling every word echo in my chest. "You showed me exactly where I stand in your life." My resolve was like a steel cable, tightening everything that was left. I wasn't saying this with aggression, but with realization. It wasn't just a statement, it was a demand for respect, something I had long lacked. And though I knew my words might be harsh, I understood they were necessary. He raised his voice again, but there was something else in his words now, a mix of desperation and confusion. "This isn't the end, Gloria. You can't just end things like this," he almost pleaded with me. "Some furniture and a car." I stood in front of him, not allowing myself to be distracted, not giving him any reason to think I would turn back. I hadn't turned back, and I wasn't going to. "Furniture, a car, they're just things," I replied, looking him directly in the eyes. "But what we're missing is respect and love. And you can't get that back, Michael, not because you want to, but because you've shown me that I was never your priority." My heart wasn't as heavy as before when I spoke those words. It was a release, not just a farewell to the house and the things, but to the expectations, to what I thought I needed to be happy. In that moment, I understood that happiness isn't something that comes when someone else gives it to you. Happiness is something you build for yourself. He was silent, his anger turning into confusion. He didn't understand that I had left far more than just physically. He looked at me with something like astonishment, as if realizing that some inevitable change had taken place. "So what now? You're divorcing me over this?" His voice was full of fatigue and regret, but something inside me told me this wasn't the moment for regret. I answered as if I had no doubts at all. "If this is what it takes to show you I'm serious, then yes." The words left my lips with bitterness, but also necessity. It didn't hurt, but there was such firmness in my voice that I knew I could never go back. He looked defeated, as though all the strength had left him. His gaze became empty, as if the realization of everything that had happened hit him, and he didn't know how to handle it. He didn't know what to do with the fact that I was no longer part of this world. "You've made your point, Gloria," he said, almost whispering, with pain in his voice. I looked at him. It wasn't about points of view, it was about the life I had built for myself. "It's not about proving a point, Michael," I replied, and there was something final in those words. It's about creating a life where I can be happy. A life where I'm respected and valued. And right now, in this life, not including you, I added, feeling those words erupt from me, freeing me. He left silently, not saying another word. The door closed softly behind him, and I remained sitting in my old room. The silence after our confrontation felt not only physical but also emotional. I knew this was a turning point, the moment when there was no turning back. Ahead of me lay an uncertain future, one in which I could only move on my own terms. A few weeks had passed since our last meeting. It was still unclear where I was headed, but I felt that staying in the past was no longer an option. I sat at the kitchen table in my mother's house. In front of me lay a stack of divorce papers, each sheet seeming heavier than the last. I could feel the inner chaos settling, leaving room for this final step to be taken. My mother entered the kitchen, her gaze filled with a mix of concern and support. I knew she was worried about me, but I couldn't help but feel gratitude for her presence in this moment. "Are you sure about this, Gloria?" she asked, sitting beside me. Her voice was soft, but I saw that same caring in her eyes that had always been her trademark. I looked at her, and in that moment, all the doubt that had tormented me in recent weeks solidified into certainty. The answer was simple, and I no longer needed to hesitate. "Yes, Mom, I've never been more sure of my decision," I said, though there was still pain inside. She sighed, gently reaching out to squeeze my hand. There was no judgment in her gesture, only understanding. At that moment, the phone rang. "Michael." I saw my mother stiffen slightly, but she said nothing. I picked up the receiver with an invisible effort, not wanting to face this conversation, but knowing it had to happen. "Gloria, please, let's not do this," he said, his voice pleading, and I felt him literally trying to pull me back into that empty life I had left behind. I sighed deeply, trying to calm myself, and replied, "It's over, Michael. I'm gone. You need to do the same." In the silence that followed, I felt everything inside me explode with pain again, but I couldn't allow myself to turn back. "I never thought we'd come to this," he said, his voice now full of confusion. "A few arguments over a car." I shut my eyes to his words. It wasn't about a car. It was about how he never valued me. It was about how I had stopped being a part of his world. "It's not just arguments, and it's not just a car, Michael," I said, my voice as firm as stone. "It's about being valued and respected. You made your choice, and now I'll make mine." He fell silent, and I couldn't listen to his excuses anymore. I was ready for this moment. "That's it," I finally said. "Yes, that's it." I hung up the phone, signed the divorce papers, and each signature felt like a step into a new world, one where I was no longer part of his life. Every movement of my pen felt like a release. My mother sat beside me. She saw me signing the papers and noticed the tears in my eyes. But she said nothing. She understood. Over these weeks, she had learned to remain silent when words couldn't help and to be there when it was needed. She understood that sometimes the best way to support someone was to just be there, without saying anything. After the process was complete, I gradually started getting used to my new life. A new routine, free from constant pressure and deceit. I began to feel like myself again, for the first time in a long time. There were moments of loneliness, and sometimes I doubted, but they were fleeting. The worry I had once felt in my soul was no longer there. I had chosen the path of self-respect, and with each passing day, it felt more and more like the right choice. A few weeks went by, and I finally took the step I had long avoided. I went out for dinner with friends. We laughed for hours, sharing stories about what had been happening in our lives. That evening, In the cozy atmosphere of the restaurant, I finally forgot about the past months of my life, the pain, and the disappointments. It was a moment when I felt that I had control over my life again, that it was once more in my hands. As we were leaving the restaurant, Sarah, one of my friends, nudged me and said, "You look different, Gloria. You seem happier." I smiled, and in that moment, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I finally understood that I was in control of my life, that I could be myself, and that this was now my life. Standing on the street, surrounded by the lights of the city at night, I felt like it was the beginning of a new chapter. Everything was new, and everything was possible. Months passed since my divorce, and I sat on the small balcony of my new apartment, enjoying the quiet of the evening. There was something special in the air, something calming. I gazed at the city lights, the endless flow of cars below, when suddenly a notification pinged on my phone. It was a message from Linda. She was always up to date on the latest gossip. "You won't believe it, your ex is working himself to exhaustion just to keep his sister's family afloat. Damn, he's drowning in debt and drama. I saw him yesterday. He made his bed and all that," Linda wrote, and I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and pity, as if I had just learned that everything that had happened was not in vain. I glanced at the screen, scrolled through the message, and quickly replied, "I know. He made his choice." I put the phone down, lost in thought. This was the last bit of information I had received about Michael. The last time I heard, he was working overtime to support Laura and her kids, completely consumed by something that really wasn't his life. And while part of me felt some justification, maybe even relief, another part felt a strange pity. I had long let go of any guilt, the thought that I could have changed something. It was his choice, and I wasn't part of it. I continued building my life, a life that was only mine, and only for me. I had a new job, new friends, and most importantly, the peace of mind I hadn't felt in many years. I treasured and enjoyed every minute of my new life. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how my world had changed, how I had changed. I was independent, making decisions only for myself, living without the constant drama that once consumed me. And in that moment, I realized how much I had accomplished, how far I had come from where I was just a few months ago. The next day, I met Sarah for coffee. She was always direct, and as soon as I sat down, she spoke up. "You look great, Gloria, really great. Not like back when you were with, what's his name?" I laughed, feeling the laughter come out easily and freely, unrestrained. "Thanks, Sarah," I replied, smiling. "It's been a journey, but I'm in a much better place now." "That's true, you deserve it," she said, sipping her coffee. "After all the crap he put you through." I nodded, feeling a swell of pride in my chest for having endured, for getting through everything that once seemed impossible. I had learned so much, but now, there was only one thing that mattered: moving forward, without looking back. As we chatted, I realized just how much I had changed. I was no longer the woman who settled for things that didn't align with her own vision of life. I had become stronger, more confident in myself. I was in control of my life, able to make decisions that made me happy. On my way back to my apartment, I felt a rush of optimism, like the air in this new life. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. On the contrary, it excited me. I was ready for whatever would come next. Ready to face new challenges, but also new opportunities that I knew would inevitably come.